This is Super Yacht News with E. Sisman.
Hi, welcome back to the channel. So we've got an update on the sailing yacht Bayesian sinking. The prosecutors in Sicily have added 2 more of the crew to the list of people under investigation for potential charges in the sinking of that yacht. I'm going to read a short bit from the article from answer.it website. It's only short, so the article is entitled Bayesian Ship Engineer and Sailor Under Investigation. So, Termini Emerse, prosecutors placed an additional 2 Bayesian crew members under investigation, British ship engineer Tim Parker-Eaton and sailor Matthew Griffiths, who was on duty on the night the luxury yacht Bayesian sank off the coast of Porticello on August 19th, investigative sources said Wednesday. The ship engineer is being probed on charges of suspected multiple negligent manslaughter and causing a shipwreck for possibly failing to activate security systems to close the boat's hatches and doors, which could have caused the engine room to flood, provoking a blackout and contributing to the shipwreck. So we're going to get into all this in a minute. Meanwhile, Griffiths, who was on night watch in the cockpit, should have allegedly warned about the arrival of the violent weather event that led to the ship sinking, investigative sources say. Now, the term sailor suggests that Griffiths is a deckhand. If he was a second officer, they would call him an officer, right? He may be experienced deckhand, although he's only 22 years old, so I don't know how experienced he can be. He'll probably have a maximum of 4 years experience because you can't go away to sea until you're 18 in most cases. However, unless he has some qualifications that he generally wouldn't be required to have, then he's not qualified to operate the equipment on the bridge, such as the radar, which would inform him of a storm approaching. He wouldn't know how to read the data. I mean, he might have experience of doing it, but he's not qualified to do it. Now, let's remind ourselves also of what the Air Force said, the Italian Air Force said the forecast was for that evening. The Air Force representative said there were forecasts of strong winds and a storm alert, but with good visibility and no suggestion of a tornado or downburst. Now, when you work at sea, you get a lot of storms. The idea that just because there's a storm, you should wake everybody up and put life jackets on them, which is what Mr. Constantino said from the Italian Sea Group, is ridiculous. And anybody who works at sea will probably agree with that. If you did that, you wouldn't be there very long because most storms are just that. They're storms that pass quickly. The severity of this storm was not even predicted by the Italian Air Force. However, the deckhand on watch alone at night goes back to what I was saying the other day in a previous video, that there's never enough crew on board a yacht to operate it properly, right? Really, there should be a qualified officer of the watch on the bridge, even though it's just anchor watch. Former Peruni Navi crew, that's the company that built this yacht, they tell us that when the guests are on, or boss on, they'd work until midnight every day, and then they would have to get up during the night to do an hour's watch, each person, and the next day it starts all over again. Now, this means that most likely they're not getting their proper hours of rest, which is supposed to have 8 hours of rest between shifts. Now, as crew, we're required to fill out a form, hours of rest form every day, and any discrepancies in the hours of rest are flagged by the system. And most of these systems are electronic now. We have apps on our phones, etc. However, I worked on a yacht about 5 years ago, probably longer than that now, actually, 6, maybe 7 years ago. And my hours of rest almost every day showed that I wasn't getting enough rest. You should highlight it in red if you're not getting enough rest. But I was never questioned about it on board, and nothing ever happened about it. So it was just ignored, it seems. And these hours of rest forms are often manipulated by the crew to comply with the regulations, sometimes under order from people on board, management. Now let's go back to the engineering officer. They're saying he's been investigated for possibly failing to activate security systems to close boat hatches and doors, which could have caused the engine room to flood, provoking a blackout and contributing to the shipwreck. There's a lot of information there, and I'm wondering where they're getting that from, right? Blackout, engine room doors open. Obviously, the investigation into the cause of the sinking is just starting. So I don't know how they can be definitive about that. It could be based on the eyewitness reports. It could be the crew themselves. And yet I believe they're saying that the watertight door between the lazarette and the engine room, I think they're talking about that door and possibly a hatch above this area that leads out onto the deck, which is known as the lazarette hatch. According to a former engineer who worked on these types of vessels, there's no security system to close boat hatches remotely. And I've never heard of such a thing. So it's not a thing. So it's got to be done locally. So that's a bit confusing as to how we can be, operate security systems to close hatches. It's not a thing. Also, the boat sank on its starboard side. The lazarette hatch and the watertight door to the engine room, they're on the port side. So ingress of water on the port side would suggest the vessel would sink on the port side. But that's not certain, but that's what it would suggest. Now, the watertight doors can be closed remotely. However, that's done from the bridge, and it's not the job of the engineer, but the officer of the watch, because the engineer is not on the bridge. So I'm going to assume that they're talking about that door leading into the engine room. It secures the engine room, that watertight compartment from the rear of the vessel where the engineer's cabin is. Now, this vessel is a British flag vessel, and therefore it's covered by the Maritime Coast Guard Agency rules and regulations, and the MCA does not require this boat's watertight doors to be closed at anchor. All right, I'm going to move on to a couple of other things, the same story. One thing I keep seeing in the comment section of these videos and on other videos on YouTube and other areas of the internet is, how could the crew leave the guests on board and just decide to, abandon ship without getting the guests out of the cabins, suggesting they had a choice, they made a choice. The thing is, we don't have enough data to know if they had that choice and if they made that choice. We don't know. What we do know is the statements from some of the crew said they were on deck clearing away items, vessel was heeling at 20 degrees, and the next minute they were in the water. Now, you might be saying, well, they could be lying, but this is also the same statement that one of the surviving guests made, Charlotte Golunski. She said she was sleeping with her child on deck while her husband was a little further away in another part of the boat, and she felt oscillations of the ship. In an instant, it was dark, and she found herself in the water in just a few minutes. This is a friend of, or a doctor, I believe, of Charlotte, who gave this information out to the public. She said she tried to hold on to the child, but lost the child from her grip for 3 seconds. Now, that does not sound like she made a decision to jump into the water. She found herself in the water, is what she said, right? I remember the video from the storm in New Zealand in 2019 that flipped a 15-meter catamaran upside down like a toy, and it knocked down a 45-meter, which is about 150-foot sailing yacht named Encore, almost to 90 degrees. Imagine you're on the deck of that vessel, you're clearing away stuff like the crew said on the Bayesian, and then that storm comes in. So the big difference here is the vessel went down and never went back up, right? Because that Encore righted herself, but this vessel did not. Right, another thing that's coming up a lot is about portholes and windows. I've seen questions about whether they were open in the comments of videos, and even from the media reporting on this story. In the press conference last week, they were asking about portholes and windows being open. Portholes on ships and yachts do not open. They're made from extremely thick marine glass, and they're bonded to the hull of the vessel. The last time I was on a ship that had an open porthole, or a porthole that could be opened, was on the Queen Mary in Long Beach in California. Remember the old Cunard ocean liner? It was built in the 1930s. The porthole could open on that. I stayed there one night. I was in amazement that I could open the porthole. The only windows that open on a yacht would be very high up from the waterline, like the superstructure right at the top. However, the former captain of the Bayesian, who put out a statement yesterday, he said that none of the windows or portholes on the vessel open. Now, somebody sent us a photograph from on board, which appears to show an open porthole, and I could see why people would think that that's what it is. However, it's not an open porthole. It's a porthole with an open deadlight. A deadlight is a cover that we place on the porthole in rough weather They're usually on a hinge, with this, the one in this photograph appears to be, and it closes down and it's tightened by these giant screws that are fixed to the deadlight unit. Sometimes the whole deadlight is separate and it has 3 of these pins which you screw in to fix it in place. The reason we have these is in the unlikely event that a window or porthole would break and allow water to come in, we've got the deadlight on. The downside for us as crew is that it's pitch black. We don't know if it's daytime or nighttime outside, but we put them on in rough weather. All right, I'm going to leave it there. If you've got any information for us, if you've worked on board a Peruni Navi, or in particular, if you've ever worked on board the Bayesian, we'd love to hear from you. If anybody knows where we can get a high resolution general arrangement of the Bayesian, please get in touch. Obviously, we have one. We've been using it in these videos, but it's not as high resolution as we'd like. Ideally, we'd like the one that came from Peruni Navi, proper GA, because it has a lot more detail on. So if anyone knows where we can get one, please get in touch. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates. I'm sure there's going to be more happening in the coming days. All right, guys, bye-bye.